Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending from where you're currently tuning into this webinar. I would like to welcome you all to the 12th edition of the Cultural Marathon, organized by the Office of Public and Culture Diplomacy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. For the session today, we are exploring how we can create a cure for a sustainable tomorrow. One of the main threats for the sustainable future is climate change. In 2019, we noticed that environmental consciousness peaked, with global demonstration and strikes requesting the political leadership to prioritize environmental issues. Nowadays, the leadership in our respective countries has other concerns to deal with, combating the pandemic, which affect each country, but as well the relations between the countries. Countries have to rebalance between isolation and protecting their people and multilateralism, cooperation in finding a cure and restarting international trade. In these moments filled with some distrust about the future, a sign of solidarity can act as a light in the darkness. Earlier this week, Her Excellency Rima Al-Hashmi, Minister of State for International Cooperation, announced that the UAE has surpassed an impressive milestone of assisting over 1 million of medical professionals in more than 70 countries to help fighting COVID-19. These signs gives us hope that after the pandemic, the world can focus again on finding solutions for global challenges as climate change and creating sustainable environment. My name is Dr. Seppe Verheijen, and I'm the Chief of Staff at the Emirates Diplomatic Academy. And I'm joined today with two great panelists. We have His Excellency Dr. Thani bin Ahmed Al-Zayudi, who is the Minister of Climate Change and Environment. In his role, he oversees UAE drive to mitigate and adapt to the impact of climate change and protecting the country's ecosystem. We have His Excellency Ambassador Al-Suwaidi, who is UAE's ambassador to Spain, the Vatican, and Andorra. Before taking this important role, Ambassador Al-Suwaidi was the Consul General in New York and headed the Climate Change and Sustainability Unit at the Ministry. Welcome, Your Excellencies.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Dr. Sam.
Minister Al-Suwaidi, I would like to start with a question for you. Being the Minister of Climate Change and Environment must be an incredible hard task, especially now during the pandemic. On the one hand, you need to ensure that the country moves towards development and progress, and on the other hand, you need to ensure that you protect the environment system. How do you see your role, and how do you strike the balance for sustainable growth?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pep. Ensuring that environmental conservation and economic growth go hand in hand with the most of development and the other priority within the UAE since the beginning. Throughout the 5 decades of the country's existence, our wise leadership has always demonstrated strong commitment to this priority and will continue on the same path. We noticed so many stories at early on of the establishment preparation when the founder of UAE insisted of changing the location of the projects, the path of roads since they're going through existing through some of the species homes or nests, etc., etc. The work of the environment and the climate change, it's not a one-man show. It's a collective effort by so many entities and stakeholders. And the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment is one of the main players and working closely with other stakeholders like the environmental agencies as well as the municipal affairs within the country to ensure that there is a progress in motivating the rest of the stakeholders within the country and the community to become more environmental friendly and greener. We have great examples as well from the private sector entities who have dedicated and contributed to the reduction of the carbon footprint of their operations, and that contributes to the overall national emission reduction. I would like to mention a couple of companies, talking about Masdar, talking about Diwa, Majid Al-Fatayim Holdings, and many other excellent examples that we are really proud of within the UAE. Major step in bringing the private sector on board as well as a key driver of the green growth was establishing the environment and business metrics that seeks to channel private investments into green projects. And we have this periodic discussion with the private sector so they can get more interested in the way that we're running the business, and they transform their operation to more friendly, environmental friendly processes and procedures. We also launched the UAE Green Business Toolkit to help business become more eco-friendly. We also targeted the banking sector, which is one of the main driver and the backbone for any projects. The ministry launched the Dubai Declaration on Sustainable Finance 2 years ago, and then DIWA as well as Master launched another similar initiative so we can bring the financial institution on board supporting the country's green economic agenda. I'm really proud to say that the declaration has gained more than 32 signatories so far, and we're working with the rest of the financial sectors so they can be engaged in the topic.
Thank you. Ambassador Soweidi, listening to Dr. Thani, we noticed that UAE makes great progress on sustainable development, and especially since they signed up for the Sustainable Development Framework in 2015. Now, in your role as an ambassador to Spain, how can you assure that in your daily work you still have a close eye on climate diplomacy, and how do the host countries actually react on concentrating on climate in your work?
Well, thanks for the question, Sepp. As you know, I was the lead climate change negotiator for the UAE, and I was working for Dr. Thani Zioudi at the time. And so we worked on the climate change agreement, and we worked on the Sustainable Development Goals agreement as well. And so it's something that was dear to my heart. And, I've been really proud to see that Dr. Thani Zioudi has been able to take what we put down on paper and really implement it in a practical, real-world way. And it's really an example of how the UAE isn't just about talking, we're about doing, and certainly in my role in Spain, that's changed. But because these issues are something that's after my heart, I always keep an eye on it and try to see, how are people reacting to it. And I have to say, I'm constantly surprised. We recently had the Madrid COP25 was here in Madrid, and I really saw how the Spanish community was really energized and really behind environmental issues and behind climate change issues in particular. And we had the participation of Dr. Thani and his team in the climate change negotiations, and I know that they really showcased to the Spanish society how much the UAE has done, is actually delivering on the promises that it made. And I feel really proud that I can represent that. We have a lot of ties between the UAE and Spain in this matter. Our two countries are very close, have a fantastic relationship. So for me, it's a really easy job. But there's a lot of concrete projects we have here in Spain. Gema Solar is one of the largest solar projects in the world, and is really a fantastic example of how when countries can come together, they can really achieve amazing things. Mm-hmm. And I see that what's happening is that climate change has moved from the space of talk between governments to real world action that is happening, and sustainable development for that matter, in terms of how do we think about developing our world in a way that respects the environment and looks to new ways of developing our economies. And I think it's very interesting time in that space.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Thani, over the last few decades, we really noticed that climate change has picked up, leading to longer drought seasons, to more frequent and destructive wildfires, as in Australia a few months ago, and also an increased number of extreme weather events. Could you tell us more about the humanitarian impact of these events?
Sure, Doctor. Every year, the frequency, intensity, and duration of the natural disasters are made worse by climate change, causing more people to become vulnerable to the humanitarian crisis. In comparison to the number of extreme weather events in the 70s and the last few years, we're talking about a major jump from 70 to 80 events in 70s to something around 400 in the last few years, which means that the intensity and the frequency of those events are becoming more and more visible. There are two things about climate change that, in my opinion, make it greatest risk to the humankind at the moment. One is that it is a threat multiplier. It takes issues like poverty, hunger, diseases, and lack of access to clean water and amplifies them. Two is that it's those who have contributed the least to the problem are being hit the worst by its impacts. Perhaps the most damaging humanitarian impact of climate change is related to the health. Diseases such as cholera and malaria will likely increase in some areas as a result of changing temperatures. And the air pollution, as we all know, based on the WHO, is causing death of more than 7 million people per year. And as a result of the natural disaster, food insecurity and malnutrition are on the rise around the world. In 2018 alone, natural disasters were the main driver of hunger for 29 million people. Climate change also threatens livelihoods. Desertification and droughts negatively affect over 1 billion people in more than 110 countries. We start getting so many requests as well from African countries who have never experienced the droughts in their countries, which start a big issue affecting one of the main sectors that contributes to their GDPs, the agriculture. And it's making the refugees crisis worse as well. In 2019, natural disasters forced 25 million to flee due to the changes in natural environment related to sea level rise, extreme weather events, and droughts and water scarcity. If the world does not take urgent actions to address the climate change, humanitarian crisis will continue, and these figures will escalate dramatically. And this is what we see from the UN reports as a projection for the upcoming 3 to 4 decades from now.
Thank you, Dr. Thani. Ambassador, from a diplomatic point of view, what can we do to prioritize humanitarian action?
I think it's a critical part of diplomacy of the future. You know, as Dr. Thani mentioned, the climate and it really exacerbates issues of poverty, issues of migration, and many of the problems of communities who are vulnerable are happening faster and quicker than we've seen in the past. And diplomats really have a unique role, and we are a channel by which we can build those relationships to help solve what are global problems. These are not issues that can necessarily always be solved only at a local level. They have to be solved through multilateralism, through global cooperation, because they're transboundary issues. They're issues that cross the boundaries that the countries have. And so it takes countries working together. And the UAE has been really, really at the forefront of this. We're one of the world's leading donors per GNI. In the COVID crisis, we were delivered aid to 70 countries, as I'm sure we'll get to later. We're always providing support, humanitarian aid to many countries. We're also providing development aid to countries. Dr. Thani knows very well a lot of the solar projects where we delivered aid in a different way, aid in the form of solar energy through wind farms in Pacific Islands, to solar panels in some of the vulnerable islands. And then in Africa, a lot of projects to help with agriculture, with water supplies, with all of the issues that we take for granted in our developed or developing countries, in many developing countries, but in some of the poorest countries in the world are really, really important issues. And things that we have to focus on. And diplomats can have a really unique role in building those ties between countries so that we can work together on tackling some of these important projects that impact both of us in many different ways.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Thani, to follow up on what Ambassador Al-Suwaidi was saying, could you give some examples of these projects that UAE is doing abroad?
Sure, Doctor. The UAE has long been committed to this goal. In the recent years, we have consistently providing over 1% of our annual gross national income to the projects worldwide that focus on the interrelated issues of health, humanitarian, and climate change mitigation. Our disaster relief aid loan exceeded $118 million over the past 5 years. In this context, I must mention our efforts to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy, which mentioned by His Excellency Mike, because renewables holds the solution to many of the challenges that the world faces right now, such as climate change, air pollution, and the economic slowdown. To date, we have invested in renewable energy projects across 70 countries that have a total value of $16.8 billion US. We're also a major donor, having allocated close to $1 billion US in granted soft funds for renewable energy projects. In addition, we have provided technical expertise and project assistance through our flagship energy company, Master. Notable examples of our initiatives include the IRENA ADFT project facility, and through this partnership with the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, and Abu Dhabi Development Fund, we have allocated $350 million US in soft loans for renewable energy projects in developing nations. This was the UAE's first development assistance program in the field of renewable energy, and one of the larger bilateral investments in this sector. The scheme is currently in its seventh cycle, having offered almost and supported to 32 projects to date. I want to mention a couple of projects which Ambassador Majid as well mentioned. In 2013, we set out under the leadership of the science chef Abdullah Mzaid, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, the landmark $50 million US UAE Pacific Partnership Fund that aims to address the challenges posed by the Pacific region's energy costs, which sadly are among the highest in the world. 11 countries have benefited from 10 solar photovoltaic projects and one wind farm with a total capacity exceeding 6.5 megawatts. Many were the first utility-scale renewable energy facilities in their respective countries, and we started even building partnership with the rest of the countries in the region, like New Zealand and Australia, increasing the capacity in some of those projects. And we developed some projects in close collaboration with the World Bank as well. 2017, we established another $50 million US Caribbean Renewable Energy Fund that seeks to deploy the renewable energy solutions to 16 Caribbean islands countries. Last year, the fund launched its first 3 projects aimed at installing total of around 1.5 megawatt of solar PV capacity. And others are currently under development, under review, and the technical discussion between the technical team from the UAE as well as the colleagues at the Caribbean islands. And the facility seeks to reduce energy costs in this region and improve, for sure, the resilience to the natural disasters. And we underscore the hurricanes Irma and Maria. I mentioned as well the Hurricane Irma and Maria because after the hurricanes, we managed to coordinate with the islands to really strategize some of the renewable energy projects in their country. Building on the success of those programs, we have as well joined IRENA's the 6 Lighthouse Initiative that inspires to accelerate the adoption of renewable energy in those small islands developing countries around the world. In addition to improving the electricity access for population and meeting a larger part of their energy needs, projects have helped bring to light creating jobs, opportunities, supporting the development of local communities and economies, and for sure, cut down on pollution. They also enhance the climate change resilience of the countries and reduce their dependence on imported fossil fuels, which is especially an important point during the current pandemic that has negatively affected the global trade. I want to mention this point here. Some of the islands already achieved their Paris Agreement based on those projects which we provided to those small islands.
Thank you, Dr. Dani. Ambassador Suwaidi, in the introduction, already mentioned the aid that the UAE was giving to combat COVID-19. And now Spain was also one of these countries that received aid from the UAE. Could you tell us a bit more about what kind of aid this was, and as well the importance for the UAE-Spain relations?
Thanks, Sepp. I think that we were very fortunate here at the embassy to be able to help to deliver aid to the Spanish community here in Spain. We were able to give financial support to local hospitals, and that came from us as an embassy ourselves. And it was an initiative that we did to show that we are up here and we're in Madrid and we're part of the community. As you know, Spain was hit very hard by COVID-19, and one of the countries that really was impacted by this terrible disease And we were certainly here on the doorstep, seeing firsthand the impacts of that. And I'm very sorry for the loss of life that we've seen, and the terrible nature of this disease. And so we wanted to do something where we were able to directly show Spain and the Spanish people our friendship and support, and to take the opportunity to enhance our collaboration. And even at a time where the UAE was facing many of the same challenges as other countries, our leadership still wanted to provide support and assistance to other countries, which really was something that made me very proud, was that even at our hardest moment, we were looking to support other countries and to lend the hand of friendship. We had supplies of medical equipment that were sent from the UAE to Spain, and in my interactions with local officials, they were very, very grateful for that support. We also did many other smaller scale initiatives where we distributed supplies or helped financially to purchase supplies locally for hospitals and alike. And so I think that it was really an example that our leadership sent that this is a global issue, and this is an issue that we should tackle together as nations. And I think that once again, the UAE set a great example. I just wanted also to mention, to the points that Dr. Thani was talking about before, we often deal with humanitarian crisis like COVID-19, and then we sometimes don't think about how we build resilience or how we prepare countries to prevent or to be ready when those crises happen. He mentioned the projects in the Pacific Islands. I know for a fact that one of those solar projects halved the electricity bill of one of those Pacific Islands, which means that they can then take that valuable money that they would normally be spending on power and use it in other areas like healthcare, like education, like other areas. And so there's the short-term addressing of short-term needs, but then there's also the visionary leadership that our leaders have shown in building and helping to build resilience, so that when the crisis comes, we're ready. And you saw that with COVID-19. You saw how the UAE was prepared. The crisis came. Our leadership took action swiftly and helped, and was able to take control of the situation in the UAE and go on to help other countries to tackle this crisis in their backyards. And so I really think that it's an example of how multilateralism and fraternity between countries can really have a big impact in addressing issues before they happen and dealing with them when they happen, when the crisis happens.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Thani, to follow up on the points raised by the Ambassador, maybe it's a bit early to ask, but is there already some lessons that we learned from the pandemic that could be very useful in the combat against climate change?
One of the most important lessons from this pandemic is that global coordination is really a key to combat any global issue. And this pandemic has brought a level of global coordination that we have never witnessed before in the history. Once again, the UAE was at the forefront of the international efforts to fight the outbreak. As part of our Homeland of Humanity initiative, we have assisted in evacuation of 215 people of 10 nationalities who were stuck in China, and offered them medical services in the international humanitarian city in Abu Dhabi. In response to a request by South Korea governments as well, we facilitated the evacuation of 80 Korean nationals and their families members from Iran, in a step that reflects our strong relation with our neighbors. We have also welcomed 2 airplanes carrying 400 students, mostly GCC nationals, and took care of them in their quarantine and testing. On Monday, Her Excellency Reem bint Ibrahim Al-Hashmi, the Minister of State for International Cooperation, announced that the UAE has assisted more than 1 million medical workers worldwide by providing over 1,000 tons of personal protective equipment, medical supplies, and food aid. Valuable lesson that has come out from this pandemic is that no country is immune to the global disaster. And COVID-19 has also shown us that early action is very vital, very important, and any delay in the response can build and result in devastating outcomes. Countries that have taken drastic measures to limit the spread of the virus early on have recorded the greatest success. It's like the world joined forces to fight the virus. It can do the same for the climate change, because we know now we can do much better if we prepare much earlier.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, to follow up on that, for both of your jobs, it's really important to meet people in person, to go to big conferences where you can discuss these topics. Now, since the pandemic, this is not possible anymore, and the only way how we can interact is virtually. Do you really see a future of virtual diplomacy, or will we go afterwards back to the normal before? Sorry, Dr. Dan?
It's going to be a mix of both. We will continue now with the new direction of having these virtual meetings, which is going to be much quicker and much easier to have accessibility to the knowledge and the experts worldwide. But at the same time, we'll still need the physical interactions because of the creativities and the innovations that usually comes out from the physical interactions. So I would say we'll not go back to the normal. It's going to be a hybrid between both the new model, which we applied in the last three months, and even going back to some of the physical meetings and visits, so we can have much better thinking, creative ideas, and creative approaches in tackling the challenges that we face, that face us all.
If I may add, here at the embassy in Spain, we had already started to undergo a process of modernizing and adapting new tools to how we do things. And I see that what COVID-19 has done is accelerated our use of video conference technologies alongside the many other new technologies that we have to adapt to in this world today. And so I agree with Dr. Thani 100%. This is an additional tool that we've learned how to use. We've been forced to learn how to use. So I think it's here to stay, and I welcome it because it does speed up a lot of our conversations and interactions. But it's also hard to explain the intangibles of when you have an in-person meeting, the sort of side conversations, or the personal connections that you make with a team and with the people, and that's where diplomats really are extremely valuable. They're a person on the ground who can understand a country or its community and help to build bridges and help to make those connections and break down barriers. That's our job, is to break down misconceptions or stereotypes and make connections between people. I'm very fortunate here in Spain that we already have a fantastic relationship in our royal families. I've met with the King of Spain, and he speaks so highly of our leadership, and vice versa. The leadership of the UAE always speaks so highly of that Spain, and our governments are very connected. We can add to that by making connections at multi levels and in multi sectors, and those human interactions are really valuable in that. Mm-hmm. So as I said, and as Dr. Thani, His Excellency said, this is another tool in our arsenal of tools, if you will, to help us to work more efficiently, to work more effectively, and to help us be more productive in what we're trying to do, and that is to build a strong relationship between us and our partners.
Yeah. Thank you. You both already mentioned before multilateralism, and in the last years, you could really see a decrease with the US pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, the Brits leaving the UK, and during the COVID-19, we saw a lot of countries taking unilateral decisions for protecting their people, protecting their economy. Now, my wife is due next week to give birth to my firstborn. And I was wondering if I would talk to him in 10 years, do you think I would tell him the year you were born is the year where multilateralism flourished, or should I tell him that is the year where multilateralism disappeared? Dr. Dan?
Well, let me speak first about the Paris Agreement, then I'm going to tackle the second part of your question, Doctor. The UAE is one of the first countries in the whole region to ratify the Paris Agreement. So we developed a national climate change plan, and we are taking the lead on the way to the climate action. Speaking about the Paris Agreement, we're finalizing as well the updated NDC, which will be soon ready for submission to the Secretariat. And we aim that we'll have one of the strongest NDC from this region. But let's not forget our ambition, very ambitious targets in the UAE Energy Strategy 2050 that seeks to achieve 50% of share of clean energy in our energy mix. Despite being a major hydrocarbon producer, our country is also a pioneer and the role model in the deployment of clean energy. And we saw in the last few months as well during the pandemic announcement of the hitting and breaking the global records when it comes to producing power from renewables, reaching 1.35 cents per kilowatt hour. And we're still competing even with our own numbers and any new projects or bids that we participate in. The UAE is also a key player in soft power, and will continue to keep our influence in the region and beyond to change perception that climate action from something that is costly to something which is absolutely necessary and will have an economical value to the country. Speaking about the multinational efforts, we start seeing in the last 2 years a stronger multinational again in the field of climate change. Well, last year we hosted Abu Dhabi climate meeting in partnership with the UN SG, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, and then we attended the UN Climate Action Summit. Unfortunately, this year the COP has been postponed to next year because of the pandemic and because of the necessity of having a physical meeting. But are we going to see the multilateralism falling down? I really doubt, because the minute that we see someone who's dropping off the international agreements, we see new people are stepping up. If we're talking about the states, as you mentioned, yes, we see the federal government is announcing that they want to pull out from Paris Agreement. But at the same time, we're seeing the local states are stepping up to take the role of the federal governments. So the players are changing, but at the same time, we all are moving toward achieving and hitting the global and international targets. So we're seeing new people and new players are stepping up to take the roles of the ones who wants to or run away from the agreements.
Thank you, Dr.
I agree 100% with what Dr. Thani just said. You know, the UAE is always a country that is going to be focused on multilateralism, and we really are focused on that. We believe that for peace and security on many issues, that multilateralism and international institutions are the way forward. And I believe, maybe as an optimist, that COVID-19 teaches us that, you know, an issue like this is a perfect example of where we have to collaborate together to solve this crisis. I think your question also needs to be looked at in a different way, and Dr. Thani alluded to that. I think when it comes to climate change and sustainable development, if you look at the rhetoric around it or the discussion around it, it's really changed. The players have changed. So rather than it being a discussion of how governments are going to solve the problem, you really see grassroots movements that are trying to tackle these issues on a low level. And from my point of view, and maybe this is a personal point of view, that's what international agreements are about. International agreements simply create the framework within which many different actors can come to the table. And when you look at the Sustainable Development Agreement and you look at the Climate Change Agreement, the real spirit of it, certainly from our perspective, is that it empowers many different types of actors to come and take part in the process. And if you look at the climate change discussion today, you see that the consumer is driving the process and business is driving the process, because the consumer is demanding it, and so business is driving it. And so you see that already. You see companies like Google thinking about their energy footprint. You see companies like Microsoft being engaged in the discussion. You see large companies like GE, others, all thinking about a sustainable new future we focus on energy, but that goes across the board. Dr. Thani is very involved in biodiversity issues, ocean issues, food security issues. And you see in all of those discussions now, we're talking about how we can do it sustainably and how we can do it respecting the environment. And so from my point of view, we're headed in a multilateral direction, and we're there. So let me congratulate you on your son, and I feel very confident that you can tell him today when he's born. You don't need to wait 10 years to say that we are in an unprecedented time of multilateralism. And I certainly see that in the short time that I've been working on issues.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think my wife did all the job. My job still has to start. So, one last question to actually to follow up. Awareness of sustainability is a really important factor. Now, at the Emirates Diplomatic Academy, we developed, for example, a card game to inform the diplomats and the new generation on the SDGs. Now, what would be your advice for sustainability to the new generation? What would you tell them? Dr. Thani?
Sure. I would like to encourage the young people to step up and become sustainability and climate advocates and become really the drivers of the change. Their awareness of the challenge ahead and their passion to be part of the solution give us hope for a brighter tomorrow. A qualified, trained, and empowered young generation can make all the difference in sustainable development, as innovation and technology skills are the most important in coming up with the out-of-the-box solutions to sustainability challenges. So for the young people, really the future is going to be dependent on the way that you guys are taking this challenge seriously, and how you guys are rethinking the way that we're running the business now.
Thank you. Ambassador?
I think that's exactly correct. I mean, if you I'll probably get the quote wrong, but His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed has often talked about how we need to celebrate the last barrel of oil that is produced in the UAE. And I really find inspiration in that. I'm a person who grew up in the oil industry. I believe the oil industry is very critical to our country and will be for many, many years. But as we develop and diversify our economy and we make the UAE more robust, more diversified economy, the real opportunity for young people is in these spaces. You see the Mars mission, you see the new technologies that are happening in the sustainable development space with new renewable technology. Masdar is a perfect example of an exciting, dynamic company that we have in the UAE. Some of these new technologies in manufacturing, in the way we manufacture things. We have an opportunity, and our young people have an opportunity to develop totally new sectors in the UAE that we never even dreamed of. So I think it's an exciting time for young people. And just as the Thani said, I would encourage them to think outside the box. Try to think that sustainable development and climate change is not just about an environmental. It's not just an environmental topic, and I say that not lightly, because the environmental aspect of it is very important, and that goes back through our history in the UAE. But it spans across our whole economy, our whole lifestyle, the way we do things. And I think that creates a whole lot of opportunity, and that's really reflected in our leadership. We always think about these things as challenges, and our leadership always show us that these are opportunities for us. And certainly they've done that in this space. And I think that young people should take that example and run with it and see where it takes them.
Thank you, Ambassador. As we come into the end of the 45 minutes that were allocated for this discussion, I would like to invite you for some closing remarks. And let's do it the other way around. Let's start with Ambassador Al-Suwaid.
Well, first of all, Seb, thank you for the discussion today. I think that this topic is really important, and just to recap on some of the thoughts we've talked about, this time of COVID-19 has really been a difficult time for a lot of countries. It's been a time where we've seen some of the best of humanity with the frontline workers who've been fighting this pandemic every day, and the way our government in the UAE has responded to it has been amazing. And I feel a real sense of pride in how our government has reacted to this, and I know that this period will pass, but we need to take lessons from that, and we need to not forget the basics of what helps us to continue to be more resilient, and that's through cooperation through countries, through multilateralism, and it's through some of the initiatives that the UAE has done that Dr. Thani's talked about, providing aid to more than 70 countries, providing huge amounts of medical supplies and food aid to our partners and friendly countries, built using this challenging situation to find opportunity and to develop new friends and new connections. And I think it's the spirit of what we do, and I hope others will learn from it.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Thani?
Thank you, Dr. Sabi. I believe that the resistance might come from short-sighted people, but we work hard to make everyone understand that climate change is not just an environmental or health concern. It also takes its toll on the economy. Future projections indicate that it will destabilize economies and pose physical risks to the assets. My personal advice would be not to underestimate the importance of climate-proofing key sectors. Economic progress will not be sustainable in the long term unless climate measures are implemented across all sectors.
Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. I would like to thank as well the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for this initiative and bringing people from different culture and background together to think about our future. We can leave with a message of hope, I think, and stay tuned in for the next session of the Culture Marathon. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.